Good evening, everybody. Just give people a minute or two to just gather, just if anyone is coming a little bit late. We've got some slides coming through now telling you a little bit more about the Royal Meteorological Society and some of the benefits of being part of the society. I'll just give it another minute and then we'll get rolling on this. Right. It's great to hear all the weather reports from around the country and around the world. I see Dave's distracted by a current hail shower. I can see it through my window just a few miles away in Burley and Wharfdale. Anyway, so moving on to tonight, I'd like to welcome you to our May talk from the Royal Meteorological Society's Yorkshire Centre. My name's Dorian Speakman. I'm a committee member of the Yorkshire Centre, but my day job is actually flood risk management at Leeds City Council, my sins. So I'll be your host for tonight. We also have Kamalika Sengupta, who is our chair of our local centre, and she's going to be co-chairing tonight's session. She's a postdoctoral researcher in meteorology at the University of Leeds, and she's now a teacher. So if there's any technical issues at my end, she'll take over if there's any problems, and also highlight your questions as well from the chat. So first of all, over logistics, this talk tonight from Alexis Percival is going to last about half an hour or so, and then we're going to have about a quarter of an hour of questions and any comments as well, which follows that. So if you put your comments in the chat box on the right of the screen, we can display these in the main window during the question and answer session at the end of the talk. So focusing on tonight, we have a really interesting talk to us on health and climate change from Alexis Percival. So if you could turn on your camera and say hello to the viewers, Alexis. Thanks. Great. So Alexis is the Environmental Sustainability Manager at the Yorkshire Ambulance Service, as well as the Climate Change Lead for the Humber Coast and Vale Integrated Care System. So she works closely with the Health Declares, the Leeds Climate Commission and the Greener NHS programme to drive forward carbon emission reductions regionally and nationally. She started first as the first sustainability manager for an ambulance service in the country in 2009. So her role is quite challenging because she's trying to encourage staff to drive in a more efficient green manner, as well as get to the job to save lives. So yeah, there's a bit of I can imagine a bit of a tension there. She's been working to slash the carbon footprint for the ambulance service with innovative technologies in the States, as well as looking at the procurement department to decrease emissions through buying choices. So there's lots and lots of different things going on there. So going further back in her background was like 15 years. She's got experience in the environmental field and as an environmental consultant. So she's worked on large international projects in the UK, as well as Brazil, Germany, Mozambique, and Australia. And she managed to squeeze in a career break in that, where she managed to sort of go around the world in a ex-military ambulance, so just keeping the ambulance theme there rather nicely. So with that, I shall hand over to Alexis, who's will continue. Thank you very much.
Everybody, good evening wherever you are around the world, and for some of you it might be a good morning as well. Can we have slides for clicking through, please? So I'll give you a bit of an introduction to myself, with the wonderful Dorian introduced. I'm the Environmental Sustainability Manager here in Yorkshire for Yorkshire Ambulance Service. I am leading on a variety of different climate change issues, but also looking at sustainability challenges and projects. And health is a core part of the climate change impact. And I'll give you a whistle-stop tour of some of the challenges we've faced and some of the challenges we will be facing. And it's not a very pretty picture, I have to say. I'm sitting in my field. We can see it happening already, as many of you can around the world. And I noticed some wonderful names on the list who've contributed to quite a lot of this stuff. Unfortunately, I haven't got your graphs in, John. John Thorns, who's one of the leading academics looking at lots of different health impacts from weather on the emergency services around the UK. And also the wonderful Dorian, who's just spoken as well, also has looked at the assessment of what the ambulance services impact has been for various different climatic and weather incidents. So the health emergency, it is an integral part of health and climate change, and we are likely to suffer some really serious impacts. So this, I'm sure you've seen the climatic impact of this global warming incident. This is basically, this is what the world looked like in 1880. And this is a gift that would basically take you through to now. We have superheated our world to the point that 1880, it was a lot cooler and a lot rainier, but also we had a fewer incidents of heat waves. We had snow and we had ice situations. So we're in the process at the moment of working through where we're going to go. So the World Economic Forum has actually looked at what we need to do in order to identify the challenges that they've got for world economies, and climate this year features very, very heavily. Cyber attacks, weapons of mass destruction, and information and infrastructure breakdown are also part of that critical part. So they've identified with the World Economic Forum, we're looking at climate action failure. So if we don't hit our 1.5 degrees, what is likely to happen from that? Biodiversity loss, we're in an ecological climate emergency at the moment. Extreme weather, water crises, natural disasters, human-made environmental disasters, and infectious diseases. This is the news at 10, the high-level impacts that happen on a daily basis. And many of these are having ripple effects now across the world. So the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, of which within Yorkshire we have 6 of the leading writers. It is a collaboration of various scientists across the world, and they are set to have the CCRA, which is the Climate Change Risk Assessment, which will be coming out on the 16th of June. And they've identified we need to keep our temperature below 1.5 degrees in order to mitigate and minimise the amount of impact that we could potentially have. For the UK, for the UK, we are looking at, well, across the planet, we are looking at a representative concentration pathway at this present moment in time that would be around 8.5 degrees. So we're at a critical point at the moment. If we tip over the 1,200 parts per million, we are looking at an exponential runaway climate change that we may not be able to control. What we need to be looking at is this pathway of 2.6, which essentially needs to be lower than that in order to minimise the amount of carbon dioxide in the world and then be able to control it. So to put that in context, those scenarios will be influenced by how much carbon dioxide, how much methane is in the atmosphere. So the RCP 2.6, which for you and I is 1.5 degree temperature rise thereabouts, will mean that we are looking at scenarios that are as they are at the moment. We're presently at a 1.1 degree temperature rise, and we are looking at what we can do to essentially minimise that. But if we get it wrong and we don't comply with everything that we should be looking at, we're looking at a 4 to potentially 7 degree temperature rise. And those are the very, very worst case scenarios. So within the UK, we are looking at, even with a 2 degree temperature rise, we're looking at warmer, hotter summers with very much like what we experienced yesterday, lots of hailstorms, flash flooding, and we're also looking at wetter winters, which will also lead to more flooding. Across the rest of the planet, this will have many, many different impacts, and some will lead to extreme drought, some will lead to more flooding. So it is something that we have within our control if we can start to get it right. So there's also another impact which we'll touch on, which is sea level rise. And unfortunately, we have some of this already baked in, and we are looking to experience about a 1 metre sea level rise across the planet by the end of this century. Potentially, through the UK climate projections 2019, they've estimated it could be up to 3 metre sea level rise. So the challenges we face is we've committed through the various pledges at the moment to around a 2.4 degree temperature rise. But with the various policies and optimistic targets, we could get it down to 2 degrees. Hence the reason that COP26 this year will be very, very critical. We are sitting at a 1.2 degree temperature rise, and it's not going to take very much for us to tip up and over that 1.2 degrees. So this is what we've been looking at as meteorologists around the world. I'm sure you've kind of seen these. This is stats from the Met Office, and this is very much up to date, giving us the temperatures that we've experienced. This year is set to potentially be the hottest on record again. And year on year, we're looking at hotter and wetter summers, hotter and wetter winters, and we're looking at various different challenges that will come with those across the world, and also within localized meteorological situations as well. So this might not be a very easy to read graph, but basically we're at the point now that we could lead into what is called a tipping point. So essentially, it's not just a case of we're just going to have a hotter world. We are going to have a hotter world that will start to defrost lots of other things. So there's set to be with one of our largest world's lungs, the Amazon rainforest, potentially could die back altogether, which with the release of all the topsoil and washed away, we could end up with a major incident where we're not producing enough to cool the world, and we end up with a complete dieback of the Amazon. We've seen a major ice calving happen 2 weeks ago in West Antarctica, and a major ice sheet carved off and has set sail, which could increase the sea level by an extra 2 centimetres or more. But there's also other issues that if the Antarctic starts to defrost, we could potentially end up with a 15 to 20 metre sea level rise in various areas. But we're also looking at major deglaciation in some areas and tracts of the world. And there's also another major tipping point that we're not 100% certain what could happen. So with a warmer world, we end up with the permafrost melting, and the permafrost has an awful lot of methane locked up in it, and potentially could be released into the atmosphere, which accelerates the warming potential, and we could go past the 4 or 5 degrees a lot more rapidly than anticipated. So there's a lot of challenges that we have, and this is why scientists are very critically stating that we need to accelerate our carbon reduction. As I was mentioning about the permafrost, this is one of the things that has been highlighted with the heat temperature. This is the Siberian heat wave that they experienced last year. There's the normal line, and then there's what it should be around 20 degrees, pushing up to 40 degrees is what they experienced last year. And that has meant that some of the deep frozen land has started to defrost. So it's seen major methane explosions that potentially might have happened in the deep permafrost area. So it is an unknown tipping point that the extent of we're not 100% what will happen with that. So how is the climate crisis associated with healthcare, and how is it a health crisis? These are the Doctors for Extinction Rebellion, who understand and have experienced the front line of climate crisis, from air quality through to various heat waves, cold waves, flooding incidents across the entire country and across the entire world. Doctors are rising up and saying, we need to make the change because we're going to be dealing with this. And some of you may have heard of a little pandemic that might have happened over the past year. COVID is a product of a climate crisis, and part of the issues that we have is that pandemics will become a more common occurrence. So COVID might be one part that might kill many millions, but there may be another climate crisis that will happen that will push animals into the path of humans, and we'll end up with more kind of zoonotic transmissions that are part of that. So healthcare itself is a major contributor across the planet. The carbon footprint of the health sector is around 4.4% of the global net emissions. That's just below aviation, or just below the digital sector, and it would be around the 5th largest emitter in the world if it was a country. So there's a major impact and a major challenge that we have ahead of us. It's no surprise some of the big emitters are the US and China, but the EU also plays a big role, and there's other parts of other nations around the world. But the lower, as we've seen with India, they use an awful lot, but they're not. Many of the kind of third world countries are not contributing as much as some of the more developed world. So there's a lot of opportunity for healthcare to start to decarbonise. Now, the NHS, where I work, and so the National Health Service, is the 3rd largest organisation on the planet, behind the American Army and the Chinese military. So we're responsible for around 45% of the UK's carbon footprint. So we have another major contribution, and we contribute to road traffic, so about 5% of the road traffic at any one time. 7% of hospitals in England are also built on a floodplain and have experienced flooding. Hull Royal, for example, is at the moment just below sea level, so it could set to be flooded at any time with sea level rise. 9% of GP surgeries and health centres are also located in floodplains. So we have a real challenge, and climate change is already starting to have an impact on us. So by tackling climate change, we can help to reduce the causes of ill health. So interlinking with air pollution, heat waves, extreme weather, rainfall and flooding, we have to look at this and we have to take it seriously. So we've got around 1.5 million people that work for us within the NHS, and another 1.5 that work within the health and social care network across the UK as well. So there's a lot of people we can help to influence and change the lives of many through the health system. So the scale of the challenge, as with many organisations, we've started to look at our carbon footprint, and it's enormous. As 4-5% of the UK's emissions, we have around 25 million tonnes of carbon dioxide that we generate. And we've been set the target that we need to, by 2045, get to 0. How are we going to do this? Well, the challenge was laid down in October, that we needed to reach a net zero target, and the Delivering a Net Zero Health Service document was issued, with realising that the climate emergency is a health emergency. So where does our carbon footprint sit? And this is applicable to any organisation, and you and I, and it kind of resonates for an organisation that is as big as the NHS and so diverse, that we need to look at all of these things. So Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions are things that we buy and we use, as in we have switch our electricity on, we run our estates, our hospitals, we also have our fleet of ambulances, and also our electricity consumption. But a scope 3 is the more difficult one to try and solve. So we have many, many billions of pounds that we spend on our PPE, our medicines, food and catering, staff commuting. All of these sit under the scope 3, and they're a bit more difficult to target. So the scope 1 and 2, we've set a target of 2040, and the scope 3, we're looking at 2045 because it involves a lot more organisations to get involved within. So those targets are not, by 2040 we just turn the lights off type of thing. We need to kind of have a reduced reduction, and there's a realise that there will be some that technology will be the only ones that can resolve that. So we need to get to an 80% reduction by 2028 to 2032. That is a very short time scale to decarbonise a major chunk of the NHS. But also we've, for the Carbon Footprint Plus, which is the 2045 decarbonisation, we're looking at an extra 18 years from now to kind of get to the 18% reduction, because there's a lot of supply chain involvement that we need to look at. So what would the benefits be to the health service? Because what we do influences many other people, and recognising that the climate crisis is something that can help and improve the health impact. Let's have a look at what exactly the health impact is and the economic impact. So flooding increases in the frequency of flooding. It affects people and homes and well-being. So the increase in flooding basically can have a direct impact on mental health. So flood damage itself will increase by the 2080s to between 1.2 billion and 2.1 billion, and then up to 12 billion by the 2080s. I think that's an underestimation. I think we're likely to have an awful lot more impact within the UK. Flooding is more likely to affect those that are least well off, so those that can afford housing in floodplains. They are usually the ones that are 8 times more likely to be affected by coastal flooding, and also sitting next to rivers and various areas like that. Mental health impact, there was a study that was carried out, and after the 2007 floods, there was a 2 to 5-fold increase in the amount of mental health issues. And within the health system, we're realising that there is a lag of about 9 to 10 months that people start coming in with eco-anxiety, looking at problems with their mental health whenever it rains, and also the kind of stresses and strains that go with flooding and the impact on communities, and having your house wrecked and having it all sorted. It can take quite a while for that mental issue to start to develop. But we're realising that there's a big impact within that. Now, sea level is set to rise in the UK by around 3 millimetres a year, but it will rise by about a metre or more by 2100, putting a strain on the UK's flood defences. And there are, London basically gets flooded at the moment, about 10 to 15 times a year. That's increased dramatically since about 10 years ago, where it was once or twice every 10 years. So there are around 5 million people in the UK that will be significantly affected by flooding by the 2080s. And there's likely to be a mass displacement of people with financial ramifications as well as psychological aspects that will affect people. And there's already a few places that are likely to be deserted in the next 10 years, where sea inundation will come into place. So I've realised that this was a click through and I can't really show you the damage that can happen, but basically this is what we could be looking at in a very, very worst case scenario for my patch of the world. And essentially we'd be looking at a Leeds by sea with the loss of Hull, York, and we are one of the areas of the UK that is quite low lying, a 1 or 2 metre sea level rise by the end of this century will take out a lot of cities. And that will mean that around 1 million people would be displaced just within Yorkshire. So there's going to be a lot of pressures, and a lot of pressures on the health system, as well as a lot of pressures on housing that we have to try and accommodate. So there's a lot of challenges that we have just from sea level rise. Heat waves, we experienced a massive increase in the number of people that died from the heat wave in 2003, with around 2,000 people that across Europe dying in that particular heat wave. But essentially, we could be looking at around 70,000 people dying whenever a heat wave occurs. The heat wave itself, cost-wise, cost around £41 million, and to the entire economy, it was an extra £400 million. So heat waves themselves can have a dramatic impact, not just on deaths, but on cost and cost to the economy. And it's set to increase dramatically with each worst case scenario within the climate change. So if you're looking at the impacts predictions over the next 100 years, we're looking at heat deaths potentially rising quite exponentially on an annual basis. So we've got heat deaths with the mean and the minimum and the maximum at the top. But cold deaths are likely to level off because obviously a warmer environment, you don't end up with people in a cold environment. So we've got quite a lot of different challenges that will change within the system, but at the same time, those that will have an impact on our health system and put strain on stuff. So for anybody who dies, there probably would be 10 to 15 people extra who might be admitted into hospital due to the temperature, having heat stroke or various other incidences and challenges with that. So natural disasters are another kind of element of climate change that have a direct impact on various different people through their different through the different situations. So if we were looking at drought, we could end up with more and more extreme temperatures, flooding, landslides and storms, as well as the increase in wildfires. As I'm sure you can see from this kind of graph, we're looking at a dramatic increase since the 1960s, with more and more natural disasters occurring across the planet. So it's something that there's a lot of an awareness as to the economic impact, but also all of these have a human cost that go with them. We're looking at around 315 incidences per year at the moment in different parts of the world, which displace people, put pressures on systems, mental health, and the cost of it is set to rise to around 300 billion per year by 2030. So, as I said, there's around 315 incidences that have occurred in 2018, with around 11,000 deaths that happened due to those natural disasters. In fact, there were 68 million people that were affected by those natural disasters. And 2018 was the year of various different wildfires and different flooding incidents, many people displaced, many people losing homes, and many sadly lost their lives through those incidents as well. So the changing patterns of disease that will be affiliated and associated with that, we're experiencing it at this present moment of time. That kind of battle that biodiversity has with human interaction. We're experiencing an increase in the number of issues like pandemics, which for obvious reasons we all know about COVID, but at the same time, there's been an increase in the number of plague incidents that have occurred across the world. But there's communicable diseases like Salmonella, Campylobacter, Legionnaire's disease, as well as another thing like an increase in UV exposure through skin cancer, cataracts increase as well. And then there's things like disease-spreading insects that are likely to hit places like the UK that wouldn't have been experienced before. So malaria, for example, we're looking at something that we've never really experienced in the UK, and at this present moment of time, most of the Anopheles species can be found in southern Europe. But there's different scenarios that we're looking at for different temperatures would lead to an increased capability of malaria hitting the UK. So we're looking at 2020s, 2050s and 2080s, and potentially those insects have the capability of surviving in a hotter and wetter environment. So what the incidents that have happened around the world in the past few years are quite dramatic. This is a layered slide that unfortunately I didn't set up properly, but this is in the background. You can see what happened last summer, and whilst we're all consumed with COVID, there was around several billion locusts that started with a climatic incident in Yemen and spread across this entire area. They have managed to wipe out many food crops, and the incidences, which basically spread from lots of different lots of different issues with crops and crop failures. They basically ate their way through the entire country, leaving many people on the borderline of starvation. At the same time, India was about to declare their day zero for running out of water, and they had 21 cities that literally were about to run out of water. Like in South Africa, where they ran their reservoirs dry, we've got a major incident across the planet that can happen with various different tipping points, creating different incidents and different challenges for different populations. So we all kind of look at climate change and think, well, it's happening somewhere else. It's not really happening here. This is my city I live in. I live in Leeds. And this happened in 2019. These are photographs from my paramedics on the road, and these happened within the space of about a 1 year incident. This bridge got flooded, and it took out all of the comms for the airport and most of the city. There was surface water flooding that occurred everywhere. There was flash floods that happened, causing torrential downpours, which took out infrastructure as well. At the same time, we had fires on various moorlands, and we were battling as an ambulance service to cope with the amount of people that had breathing problems many miles away from the particulate matter that was coming from these moorland fires. My paramedics have to transmit people to hospitals, and they're having to deal with flooded roads that look like this in order to get to the physical hospitals themselves. At the same time, in another part of the county, those flash floods weren't actually communicating and transmitting into anything in the reservoirs, and we ended up with some drought orders in the county as well. The Sheffield floods were a particularly bad flooding situation, and this paramedic had parked his car about 500 metres further up the road to go and help a patient who was having a heart attack. They both ended up being in the water for about 4 hours and ended up with hypothermia. So these are some of the challenges that we're facing on the kind of front line. But also, we're looking with how do we get through areas like this. This is taken from our air helicopter, and this is across an entire area that took out the Drax power station and was borderline flooding that area, which supplies around 8% of the UK's electricity supply. But also we've got issues with our ambulance station. So this is my Bentley ambulance station, which everybody in the surrounding area was flooded, and there was a lot of mental health problems with all these people because it took about 1.5 years to empty their buildings. Many of them ended up being financially ruined by it, and then COVID hit and they were financially ruined by that. So there's a lot of challenges that come with climate change to affect mental health and affect the communities within which we work. So for those that might be saying, well, it's been a cold year and it's not really a problem or a challenge, 2001 is a bit of a temperature anomaly within Europe at the moment. This is the Met Office figures from April 2021, and we had a big cold bit. But as you can see around the rest of the world, we have a major overheating. And as I mentioned about Siberia, they're under a big heat spot, which could release an awful lot more methane. Africa is suffering some real heat waves, even down in Argentina and Chile. They've got some big heat waves as well. So we've got a lot of challenges for temperature that will directly affect many different health impacts. But we're estimating that there will be pushing 250,000 deaths a year, I think, is the minimum that will be directly related to that. We're going to be looking at many poor people that will be displaced, and there'll be the knock-on effects that will be associated with that. A 1% rise linked with a 1% is directly linked with a 1% rise in A&E emissions as well. So we're already feeling that, and we're already feeling a dramatic increase in the number of call-outs. So these impacts, how would they kind of correlate with health? So each temperature, each 1 degree will lead to failing crops, and up to 5 degrees, we could end up with net zero crops. And in many regions, they may not be growing at all. There'll be some rising yields in the first few temperatures, degrees temperature rise. But then there's the problem of water that will lead to glacial mountain glaciers melting, and then a decrease in the amount of availability in various areas like the Mediterranean, South Africa, and even India. But then we've got the other challenge of sea level rise. Bangladesh has already lost a lot of its coastline, which is just barely above sea level in many cases. There's already starting to be an ecosystem crash with coral reefs dying off, and we're having a rising number of ecosystems crashing. Bees through to various different bird species are dying off in larger and larger numbers. And we're set to have more and more storms, fires, droughts, flooding with each degree increase. So those impacts for you and I sitting here, if it's a 30-degree day, we're going to be a bit hot. Can we cool down? There's lots of different things that climate change are already affecting different people. So there's mental health problems, which we've experienced. There's a rising number of skin cancer, heart attacks, breathing issues, COPD, as well as more and more asthma with more dust in the atmosphere. And as I mentioned about the insects, vector-carrying diseases, so a rise in things like malaria and other kind of transmittable diseases. But also we're going to have a malnutrition across the planet, with more and more people not having the right amount of food, and the right amount of food being in the right places. We're going to have a rise in number of pandemics and a rise in kidney issues, which comes with temperature rise, people not being able to get clean water and drink enough. But also women suffer a lot of fetal abnormalities with temperature. So there's a lot of challenges that the health system will face. And climate change is the root cause of all of these. So increased rainfall, storms, flash floods, heat, drought, sea level rise will lead to various things, from energy security, mental health problems, injuries, contamination of food and floodwaters, through to things like dehydration, heat stress, heart attacks, injuries, and it's essentially a loss of life, which all of these will have to be dealt with by the NHS and health systems across the planet. So the climate emergency is a health emergency, and we all need to deal with it, and we all need to tackle the challenges that we face in order to reduce climate emission, carbon emissions, climate emergencies, and look at the climate crisis as a problem that will face all of us wherever we are on the planet. Thank you.
That's covered a lot of areas there. So right, I think it will be time for our question and answer time. So in no particular order, I shall start off with a question from Dave. Will there be a short-term benefit when comparing cold and heat-related deaths? But with time, will heat-related deaths become more dominant?
I mean, if our British spring is anything to go with, we still had a rise in the number of people that died through the cold snap. But I think the heat waves will probably have more of an impact. That there will kind of be a bit of a balance as we kind of level it out as we go through this.
Right, thank you. And now a question from John Thorns in Birmingham. And he's asking, have you got a fleet of electric ambulances yet?
Very good question, John. So we are working on it at the moment. We won £2.5 million in Yorkshire, and London Ambulance Service are in the process of building it. And you will see at COP26 an electric hydrogen ambulance, because the range is longer and the refueling time would be correct for that. So the range would be around 330 miles with the hydrogen aspect. The electric ambulances, they do exist, but their range is around 80 miles, and carrying patients becomes a little bit more challenging because it drops off to about 50 miles. So yeah, there's a few challenges on that, but we are working on that, and the NHS has been set the target of decarbonising 90% of its fleet by 2028. So we've got to get our skates on and get the infrastructure in and get the vehicles actually built as well.
Right, excellent. So now I've got a question from David, who says, you might have to sort of whiz through your slides here for this one, as I'll prepare you now. Can we revisit the slide which shows the potential flooding in the UK? And saying, well, it's quite shocking. So that would be that one about the low-lying areas in Yorkshire.
So what I'd I'll whiz back through them. I normally have them set up so that they're separate. Basically, if you go to Fire Tree Flood, I think it's called, you can see them. Basically, you can change it so you can set the flood.firetree.net. You can set it anywhere on the planet and have a look at what's your what would be a 1 metre sea level rise up to. I think it goes up to 80 metres, and it's pretty dire. It doesn't take much to wipe out very large areas, and across the planet we're probably looking at most of the capital cities being wiped out by a 2 metre sea level rise. So it is something that a lot of governments are planning and looking at the moment, because there is, as we've seen, there's been a lot of civil unrest with various incidents that happen due to climate change, so sea level rise, but also droughts, and the urgency that people have to get hold of things and kind of ransacking. All of those are kind of factored into a military assessment across the planet to look at that. So yeah, have a look at that, and you can have a play anywhere on the anywhere around the world to look at what the sea level rise would do to your particular patch, which is a bit terrifying. But bear in mind, the IPCC have stipulated, well, they stated that it would be between a 1 and 3 metre sea level rise by the end of this century. So my 6-year-old kids will be experiencing it to some extent. The IPCC have identified, along with the UK CP18, that probably by 2300 we're looking at a 13 metre sea level rise, and that is all to do with pre-industrial carbon dioxide. So if we can look at technology that can start to absorb carbon dioxide and take that out of the system, we might be able to reduce our carbon emissions, but quite a lot of the sea level is already there because water's already starting to melt out of glaciers, and a reduction in the amount of water that's actually on land as well. So there's a bit of a challenge in that.
Yeah, because I can imagine certainly we certainly would, I imagine, call in the Dutch engineers at this point, but certainly the city of Hull already has got huge flood risks because of its location, and that's going to be, very increasingly difficult to protect lower-lying areas like Hull and Selby, definitely.
Well, there are plans at the moment to build a 1 metre sea level seawall. 1 metre is going to deal with it for a little bit.
Yeah.
But if you look at the Netherlands, they're already 4 metres below sea level on what they've put in as their flood defence. So it's viable. And I know there are discussions that have happened with the Dutch, the Swedish and Scottish government to look at building a seawall from Norway to Scotland. So
it'll cost a bit.
I'm not quite sure how you can do that, but yeah, we'll see.
Brilliant. Okay, we've got another question here. Tony Flannery says, might have got it wrong, but are you saying we should take Extinction Rebellion seriously?
Yes. I mean, make your own judgment on things, but I'd read the science, and there's a lot of science that's around. You should definitely look at what Extinction Rebellion are asking for, and there is a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes, but we're looking at climate adaptation at this present moment in time. If we don't look at it, we're not going to be resilient for what is coming if we don't get it right. So we have to make the agreements and look at COP26 as an optimistic aspect, but if we're going to be pessimistic, we are looking at lots of different scenarios that will be very detrimental to the human race and could potentially wipe us out completely.
Mm-hmm. Just noticed a comment there from David, said the flood map that we've got there is set at 50 metres rather than 15.
It is, yes. This is a 50 metre. That's why I'd recommend going to the flood@firetree.net. You can kind of raise it from 1 metre up to 80 metres. I do have a click through, but I forgot to set it up as a click through to kind of show it.
Sure. Well, if it gives any perspective, I mean, I know from the latest Leeds flood defences that they're extending the ones that have just been put in, they're going to be extending. So instead of, rather than meters would give it in 100 years, there should be, up to a 1 in 100 year flood for protection up to 2, and then up to 1 in 200 years. But that's on the current 1 in 200 year event. So we've got to factor in climate change, and then it all goes down again. So this is the constant problem. So yeah, big cities, the investment's going to be done. Holderness, less likely. So yes. Another question we've got, and we'll have to sort of wrap up fairly soon, is how, very much thanks from Nicole, and she says, thank you very much for that. How optimistic are you that the NHS can and will step up to meet these challenges? And will it align with the long-term plan?
Yeah, I mean, we have a plan, and we're the first health system on the planet to have a plan. Healthcare Without Harm is just in the process of looking at a global plan to kind of drag those that are less committed along the journey and raise the awareness of stuff. So some of the stuff that we're looking at, so let me give you some quick, easy ones that you as a potential user of the NHS can actually help to shape. So Metadose Inhalers, which for anybody that uses inhaler, it's Ventolin, for example. We need to, in this next year, cut wet inhalers by 50%, and that would reduce the NHS's carbon footprint by 2%. So moving 10 people over from a wet inhaler would give the equivalent of one person's carbon emissions for a year. So 10 tons through using 2 or 3 Ventolin inhalers a year. So there's lots of different things that will be part of this journey. Anesthetic gases, looking at the estates, looking at ambulances, looking at vehicles, but also, we're sitting talking to each other, not dragging everybody into one location. This is a really critical part of how the NHS will move away from moving people around, moving patients around, dragging them into hospitals. You can do stuff by virtual consultation now. So there's a system change that needs to come. I have to be optimistic because it's my job, but at the same time, there are a lot of challenges that we have in the next 20 years to get that conversion, and that last chunk will probably come from how we decarbonise and do offsetting, unfortunately, because we're a consuming organisation. There's a lot of different things in the system that need to change. As with any organisation, decarbonising is changing the norm and making sustainability the normal day-to-day activities. It's about hearts and minds in many, many ways.
Right, excellent. So we'll have another question from William here, which hospitals are major contributors to carbon emissions. This includes hazardous emissions. So what plans are there to reduce these emissions?
Well, let me give you one example. I'm sure many of you have experienced one of these this year, these horrible blue things that we see littered around. So we've gone through 1.73 billion of the type 2R of these in this pandemic. The previous year, the whole of the NHS used 29 million, not billion, million. So we're looking at system changes that go with this. This is a very simple one because it's sitting here in front of me. I'm looking at how we can get reusables in. And this could basically eliminate the waste. So how we change what we're doing has to be that kind of, let's look at what we're using, what we're consuming, and then completely change it on its head. And it's going to be a lot of innovation, a lot of talking to patients differently, saying, well, I could give you 20,000 drugs a year to kind of keep you alive, or you could just think differently about the way you live your life, your food, your getting out and about, do a bit of green social prescribing, going for a walk. And we all have a role to play. We can't just rely on the NHS because, as we've quite understood in this year, it's been crippled by many different things through pandemics. So we need to take some elements of that. Hospitals are looking to how they can decarbonise, and there's net zero building plans that are coming in this year. So all the new hospitals that are being built will have to be built to a net zero standard. How they're going to do that, I don't know, but it's going to be a challenge. And it's a very steep learning curve from everybody, from estates to fleet to clinicians and anaesthetists. And I think everybody needs to be very aware of what we need to do, and then come up with their own localized solutions, because I'm not an anaesthetist, but they actually hold the key to reducing about 4% of the NHS's carbon emissions by changing from one anaesthetic gas to another. So all of those are about awareness and behavioural change.
And it's getting buy-in as well from those various colleagues.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
And I'm sure as you working for the council have understood, carbon literacy is a really critical part of that, because people can make those changes by understanding what the scale of the problem is.
Yeah, so we're just going through that process ourselves, but that's for another talk sometime. Great. Well, I think we've just about used up our time there. So I would just like to thank you on behalf of the Royal Meteorological Society Yorkshire. Thank you so much for your talk. It's been really, really interesting. Definitely concerning. There's a lot to think about there, because there's a lot of linkages there, which is sort of may not be quite as direct or more indirect with climate change, but there is, so much that needs to be tackled now, which, and as we notice, as more and more we're getting floods and droughts like this year, and we're having to deal with that, with moorland fires, and Leeds had, as I say, had a pretty close miss. And I've just heard from our flood risk manager that we were still dealing with the after effects of February, even though it wasn't a major incident. This is just increasing all the time. So many, many thanks. It just remains me to say that actually we are carrying on the health theme. You'll be rather pleased to know, because in June, to be confirmed the date, but we're looking at the 15th of June, we have Dr. Sagnik Day from the Indian Institute of Technology to talk about health and air pollution. So knowing what's happened in Delhi in recent years with some of the smogs there, I think that would be a really interesting talk. So it just remains me to thank everybody for coming. Thanks for your questions. And once again, thanks to Alexis, and wish you a great evening, and we'll see you in June. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.